Welcome attendees and roundtable participants. My name is Robin Schnell. I am a member of Portsmouth's South Church and the South Church Social Justice Associates. We're one of the sponsors for tonight's event. The Social Justice Associates of South Church, along with Raise Up New Hampshire, have invited you here tonight to talk about living wages in New Hampshire. A living wage means that a person can afford food, housing, utilities, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. According to the US 2019 census, pre-COVID, 7.3% of New Hampshire residents fell below that standard. Using the MIT living wage calculator, a single childless adult in Rockingham County would need to earn $13.53 to cover those basic needs. During COVID, many lower wage earners are the people that make life bearable for the rest of us. Yet, those are the people whose dignified existence we have chosen to sacrifice. Our goal tonight is to highlight the human impact on workers for whom there is not a social or a societal or governmental commitment to a living wage, and to think about how we can make New Hampshire a model for national change. So first, let's see what poverty in New Hampshire looks like. We're going to hear first from Deb Anthony, who is the executive director of Gather. Deb, during holiday season and now due to COVID, food pantries have gotten increased donations and volunteers. We feel good about ourselves when we see haves giving to have-nots, yet far too many rely on food banks like Gather for a part of their regular non-emergency income. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Thank you for having me here tonight. I give the example of COVID and how all of us across the country were struck by the long food lines. And so suddenly this field I've been working in for the last 7 years became really, big. I mean, people didn't really know that much about hunger or talk that much about hunger. Our donor base was a very particular group of people who were well informed by us about the hunger in our community and the need to help support people, but it wasn't on top of all of our radars. And so I think this COVID event really brought it to the surface, and you saw the long lines and you saw the people waiting for food. And it wasn't, I tell everybody, it's because it's always been there. It's just so fragile. The system is so fragile for people who are making $13, $15 an hour or even slightly more. And so we saw that, and we saw a huge surge. The numbers of people that came to our pantry market rose by 74%. Over the first 6 months of COVID. It was incredibly powerful and very sad to see that happen. And what we saw was also there were a group of people who are living on fixed incomes or who are the workers that we see every day in grocery stores and markets and shopping stores around our area that we go to visit, who may have had to leave because they were in semi-retirement and above the age of 16, it was too dangerous, or whose hours might have been cut, or whose spouse might have been laid off. And so all of a sudden, the people that we would see maybe once every 3 to 4 months using our pantry market as just a quick subsidy when they really needed it, are coming every month and needing to come every month. And then a whole new slew of people who never came to Gather were coming to Gather. And so it demonstrated to us that the system isn't working. It isn't fair wage and a livable wage. I was surprised when we first started talking about this whole presentation tonight that, at Gather, we made a decision a couple of years ago to give, to employ people at $15 an hour to start no matter what. And that was a big deal for us because we're a pretty small pantry and we needed to, we have very few employees to begin with and we rely mostly on volunteers. And so going to that $15 seemed like a big lift for us. And now, you look, and that's really only a sustainable wage, which is not surprising, particularly where we live. And so I think that we see it every day. We see how fragile it is for families. We see seniors who are struggling. And I tell this one story, and I know Valerie's heard it, but to really give focus to what poverty means, or living food insecure or living financially insecure, this lovely woman that comes to our pantry. I met her out front one day because I was visiting with somebody else out front, socially distanced, and she was leaving the pantry market. And she asked if anybody had ones for a 5. And somebody did. And I said, what do you need ones for a 5 for? And she said, well, I take the bus, and if I don't have change, they'll take my whole 5. And I said, well, what does the bus ride cost you? And she lives really literally a mile and a half at tops from where we are, $3 each way. And I said, wow, $6 to get here to shop. And I said, and she said, but I only come once a month because I know that's a suggested amount. And that, I try to really respect that. And I said, you can always come more. If you need it, you come more. Don't ever, that's only a suggestion. Please don't ever. And what she did was look me in the eye and she said, but that would cost me $12.
Wow.
So when you're talking about the people we're talking about, that's reality. That's reality for folks. And so we see it every day. And I wish we didn't. And I wish we didn't have to have food banks. And I wish we didn't have to have food pantries, because as one of the wealthiest nations on the earth, we should not. And so that's why I'm here.
Wow. That was astounding. That is astounding. So next, we'd like to hear from Pati Frew-Waters, who's the executive director of Seacoast Family Promise. Pati, your organization serves families with children who are experiencing homelessness. Can you tell us about the challenges people face as they try to piece together a sustainable life? And boy, we just heard about that with the bus fare around here. Tell us more.
Everyone, thanks for having me here. I guess my first reaction to Deb was that thankfully that lady has a bus, because we don't have much in the way of public transportation. That's one of the things that I've learned in working with our families. 16 years ago, I became the executive director of Seacoast Family Promise, and had somebody told me then how many families with children there were in this beautiful state of ours who were homeless, I would have told them they were crazy. We have been full every week for 16 years, except for one. And when you think of that, that's a lot of families. It's a lot of children displaced. It's a lot of people who are just not making it. Most all of our families are the working poor. They are families who get up every single day and go to work, whether they know they can make it or not. They are not willing to just sit back and do nothing. They want to have a life. They want to raise their children. They want to be participants in the community. And they want people to be aware of their plight and what's happening to them. So this is a great venue for that. It takes to move out of shelter after you pay off debt, because a lot of people who come have debt. It takes a minimum of $3,000 to move out of shelter when you have a security deposit and first month's rent, because of how high the rents are. There is no affordable housing to speak of. A little bit smattered here and there, but it's something that I would like to see more of. Our families struggle all the time with food insecurity. They visit the food pantries. The working poor will get food stamps from time to time, but I've seen moms get $5.75 a month. I've seen them get $50 a month because they were $1 over the scale. So we have to do a lot to correct what's happening in New Hampshire. But the greatest part of that is we can do it. There really is no reason for anybody here to be homeless. And every night when I come home and leave the families at the day center, I find myself more and more thankful over these 16 years for what I have. And I hope that we can all learn to work together, to pool our resources, to pool our knowledge, and to help the state of New Hampshire understand that we need to raise up some people in this state of ours. We need to raise them up. We need to hold them up, because they don't want to live off the system. They just want to live with their families. So I'm sure we'll talk about many other things tonight, but I would just like everybody to think of that. How many children and families there are living in vehicles tonight. It's going to be really cold this weekend. People are in parking lots all over the Seacoast region who can't get into shelters because they're full. So think about that when you're home and toasty. Thank you.
We have tonight Christina D'Alessandro of New Hampshire State Moms Force, the New Hampshire State Moms Force Director of Moms Rising. New Hampshire has the 7th highest median household income in the US, but residents are still likely to live paycheck to paycheck because of the state's high cost of living. 40% of Americans are one paycheck away from financial disaster. Chris, how are low-income people faring when they have to pay for childcare, which is an indispensable part of our employment infrastructure? Okay, you're on mute.
It's happening to all of us. But thank you so much for having me today. I wish, obviously, we were talking about, in some ways, a more positive topic, but I really want to give Pati full credit. I hope that this will inspire us to do better. The first thing I think I want to speak to is there are so many people that are living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have $500 in case of an emergency. And overwhelmingly, they're women. They're often women with children. It strikes me that the two stories we heard from the prior speakers reference, are generally referencing families, but often women. Women are paid 74 cents on the dollar in New Hampshire. This is part of, sadly, a trend that when we talk about wages, it's tough to talk about that without acknowledging the fact that things are simply harder for women here. Add to that an exorbitant cost of living. We come in, it's very difficult to find affordable housing. If we can get in there, if we can secure food, to go to work, we need to have high quality childcare. Childcare is often the breaking point. The average cost of infant care in this state is $12,000 a year. We're one of the few states where that is not more expensive than college, only because our state college system is simply so expensive. It's the first in the nation. And that translates to $230 a week. And I'll tell you, I know of friends on the Seacoast who are paying far more than that for infant care. And that's if they can get it. So here you're in a situation where you have to have childcare to go to work. You're desperate to find a place where you can have your child that you feel good about, that's safe, and then you're struggling to afford it. One of the big questions we often get asked in this work, we focus a lot on childcare, is how come I'm paying so much, but yet my provider is making so little? The average wage of a childcare worker is $11.25. So this is the work that is essential to allowing so much of the rest of the economy to function. This is the work that is so important in terms of supporting and forming the next generation. So much of the evidence shows that the time we spend stimulating the brain under the age of 5 is going to have huge payoffs down the line. And yet we're paying these workers, predominantly women, often women of color, on average $11.25. And yet you've got moms at the other end who are saying, I can't afford the $325 it takes. Even at $230, that's a significant portion of your wages. And when Pati brought up to get out of supported housing, it is going to cost, I have to have $3,000. Most people don't even have $500 for an emergency. So we're simply creating a situation that's such a challenge. So then I look to a lot of the women I work with, who they get the job, they're able to access the state benefits. Maybe they're supplementing their limited SNAP with the food pantry, but they actually get out and then they get offered a raise. That can drop all of the scaffolding around them, because the system is, you make $1 more, sorry, we're taking away. Now, everybody wants to work and earn a living, but they want to be able to afford these really sort of basic things that they need to make their families function and work. And I think of that, childcare is an absolute essential. So as we work to raise wages, and I know some of my other co-presenters are going to really go down deep into what it costs to live, not on the Seacoast, but across New Hampshire, we have to think about how we're going to have our system change that is going to offer people a hand up it is not going to be pushing them over the edge. We're not going to be doing back of the envelope calculations. Maybe we'll allow people to earn the money and build up the reserve that they need. And that's going to require that we look at people as a whole person, and we look at the benefit structure in the way that it builds upon itself, such that they don't come up to that cliff. And we often hear of the cliff effect and think, if I take that $1 raise that I've earned because I'm a good employee who shows up, that may topple me off the edge. So I think as we speak about this, I want to just reiterate what Pati said. We can and should do better. It's going to start with looking at lifting everyone up and seeing the whole picture that supports families.
Thank you, Christina. I thought now would be a good time to just hear some facts and figures. So we have Kathy Staub, who's a longtime activist with Raise Up New Hampshire. Kathy, you've been involved for some time with the effort to put a $15 minimum wage in New Hampshire. Currently, New Hampshire is the only New England state that ties their minimum wage to the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour for non-tipped employees. Tipped employees in New Hampshire are paid no less than 40% of the state minimum wage, which currently calculates to $3.27 per hour. But in real terms, labor statistics show that the lowest paid workers are locker room attendants at $9.11 an hour. There have been a number of unsuccessful efforts to raise the minimum wage in New Hampshire. Kathy, could you tell us a little bit about that history?
Well, yeah, I'll do my best. Thank you for putting this together and giving us the opportunity to share what we've learned over the years. Raise Up New Hampshire is a project of the Moral Economy Table, and it's a group of faith, labor, and grassroots organizations that have been working on economic justice issues, mostly at the state level. And for the past few years, we've been working hard on raising New Hampshire's minimum wage. I've got a bunch of slides because I have a bunch of numbers, and if I just say them, most people they'll just go right out of their head. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thanks. The last time New Hampshire raised the minimum wage was in 2009 when Governor Lynch signed a $7.25 an hour bill. And then the following year, the federal minimum wage was also raised to $7.25 an hour. And then in 2011, the Tea Party swept into power and eliminated the state minimum wage statute. And since then, we have been adhering to the federal minimum wage. This is the longest period that the federal minimum wage has not been raised since it was instituted during the Depression. So it's been over 10 years, and costs have gone up, and the minimum wage has not. As you can see by this chart that you have before you, every other state in New England has raised their minimum wage multiple times, and New Hampshire has just gotten left behind. This year, 20 states raised their minimum wage, including Arkansas, which now has a minimum wage of $11 an hour. That's Arkansas. And here we are in New Hampshire at $7.25. Florida passed a ballot initiative this year to become the 8th state on track to a $15 an hour minimum wage. And during the last legislative session up in Concord, 2 bills to raise the minimum wage to $10 and then $12 an hour passed the House and the Senate and were sent to Governor Sununu, who vetoed both of them. So so that's basically where we are. We've tried, and the governor said, the first time he said, well, we can't raise the minimum wage because the economy is so good and we don't want to wreck it. And the second time the minimum wage came to his desk, he said, well, we can't raise the minimum wage because it'll hamper the recovery. So there you have it. Now, a lot of people will tell you, oh, well, nobody makes $7.25 an hour. But the reality is that there are a lot of people in New Hampshire who are making way less than any of these other surrounding minimum wages. We have 14,000 fast food workers in the state, and their starting wage is $8.98 an hour. So if they go to Maine or if they go to Massachusetts, they'll be starting at a lot more. And then a lot of the essential workers that we were talking about, there's 21,000 cashiers in the state of New Hampshire. And the average starting wage is $9.90 an hour, and the median wage is $11.53 an hour. So that means half the cashiers in the state are making less than $11.53 an hour. And these are essential workers. We all would have starved without these people going to work every day. Home health aides, also very important during this pandemic. Their starting wage is $11.28 an hour. And we have 10,000 janitors in the state, and their average starting wage is $11.13 an hour. So, you know, if we had a higher minimum wage, these people would be making more money. Another argument that people make is that these other states have income taxes. I'm going to take Maine as an example. They have a $5.8% income tax for people making up to $44,000 a year. So if you subtract that from the $12.15 minimum wage, you would still be making $11.45 an hour, which is considerably more than you would be making in New Hampshire doing a minimum wage job. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. In 2019, our friends at the National Employment Law Project contracted with Public Policy Polling to do a survey of the state to see how much support there was for raising the minimum wage. 79% of people either strongly supported or somewhat supported raising the wage to $12, and 63% were in favor of raising it to $15 an hour. And people in all the political parties supported it. For the $12 an hour, 92% of Democrats supported it, 64% of Republicans supported it, and 80% of independents. Support for 15 was a little bit lower, with 82% of Democrats, 52% of Republicans, still a majority, and 64% of independents. So it's a popular thing. And places like Florida, which voted for Trump, also voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. When it goes on the ballot, which is how Maine got their minimum wage raised, it always wins. Okay, can I have the next slide? People are saying, well, people in the North Country, all businesses will go out of business. They probably don't support this as much, because we were trying to get legislators from all over the state. And so we asked them to split out the survey. So in Hillsborough County, 82% of people supported raising the minimum wage to $12 and 61% to $15. We did the 3 northern counties, Grafton, Belknap, and Coos, and 75% of people supported $12 an hour, and 59% supported $15. And elsewhere in the state, which would be the other counties, 79% supported 12 and 65% supported 15. So can I have the next slide, please? So we have the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, and they did pretty much a deep dive. The average wage this is a couple of years old, but the average wage in New Hampshire now is around $76,000 a year. So half the people make more than that and half the people make less. It's the median wage. But around a third of people in New Hampshire households make $50,000 a year. And that really is not enough to survive in just about any place in New Hampshire. The poverty level for New Hampshire is $13,000 for an adult and $17,000 for a family of 2. So a single mom with a kid at making $8 an hour would be living in poverty if she worked full time. We have some high wage earners, and that combined with this low minimum wage exacerbates income inequality. It becomes difficult for people at the low end to compete for resources like housing. And another argument that people use against raising the minimum wage is that prices go up. The HUD fair market rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in Rockingham County went from $1,398 in 2010 to $1,792 in 2020. So costs are going up regardless of whether the minimum wage is going up. Then the wage needed to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, of course, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, is $25.29. That's how much you'd need to make to rent an apartment and not spend more than a third of your income. So I'd like to see the next slide, please. And then they compared, they used the Massachusetts Institute of Technology living wage calculator to figure out how much it costs to live in different parts of the state. Rockingham County is the most expensive, and it also has the highest wage. The median wage in Rockingham County is just under $100,000. And then in Coos County, it's around $46,000. So you can see that once you have a child, your costs go way up. You need a bigger apartment, you have to buy more food and pay more for transportation. And also you now have to pay for childcare, which, as Christina has said, is very expensive. So if you're a single parent with a child, you know, it says here, if you live in Rockingham County, you need to be making like $55,000 a year. And the thing that's not included in here is student loan payments are not in here. So for a lot of people, you know, even if you're a child care worker, you're supposed to have X number of credits before they'll hire you. So you have to go to college to be an early childhood educator, and you're going to have student loans that you're going to be trying to pay with those that when you're making $11 an hour. So so that's kind of, you know, what that looks like. And then finally, if I could see the last page. Okay, you know, what can you do about it? Well, today in Washington, they introduced the Raise the Wage Act, which would be a federal act to raise the minimum wage. It would go to $9.50 in 2021, $11 in 2022, $12.50 in 2023, $14 in 2024, and it would reach $15 in 2025. So if you can call Chris Pappas and Ann Custer, if you live in their districts, and also Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, because it's also going to be in the Senate. So we're going to need everybody to vote for that. And really, they're our only hope, because as long as Sununu is governor, I mean, he's proven that he's never going to sign a minimum wage bill. So if we want to get any relief to folks, calling your federal representative might be the best way to do it. We're not giving up on the state, though. We have 3 bills that are coming up. House Bill 107 is to establish a minimum wage of $22.50, which is a more realistic living wage for the state of New Hampshire. And that's really kind of a message bill. We just want to say, hey, this, you know, if you think 15 is too high, this is what it actually, it's actually closer to what it costs to live here. And then there's a more traditional bill, House Bill 517, which would gradually raise the minimum wage to $15. The language in that bill isn't out yet, so we don't know what the increments will be. And then finally, House Bill 563, which would establish a committee to determine the living wage in different areas of the state, and also figure out how much it costs in terms of support services, to supplement the lives and keep people alive so that they can go work at the dollar store and not starve to death. And there's a hearing for that on January 28th at 2 p.m. So that's a House bill. And so, if you're inclined, please call your reps or send in some testimony to the committee, and maybe we can get something done. So I guess that's about it. I have a bunch of other research that I've done, but I've probably used up more than my time. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'll put in a plug right here to go to the Raise the Wage Facebook page and get that information if you didn't catch it all. Their bills and events and things. You can get lots of good information there. Next, I would like to hear from Emmett Soldati, who is the owner of Teatotaller, which is a Somersworth food establishment. Emmett, you've penned letters to the editor advocating for raising the wage. And as a business owner, you're committed to paying your employees a living wage. So what we want to know is how, but maybe more importantly, why do you do that?
Thank you, Robin, and for everyone tuning in. You know, as mentioned, I'm a small business owner, Main Street business owner. I've run a couple restaurants in my hometown of Somersworth. And Somersworth, for those of you that know it, it's a very small and very poor community. And so I take very seriously the challenges that folks that are willing to open up shop, opening up a business in a community that struggles, in a community that is working through poverty. And I have seen firsthand the challenges that when it comes to expenses and when it comes to having a sustainable operation, when there's not a lot of foot traffic and there's not a lot of folks around. I opened my first business 10 years ago with less than $10,000 that I had raised. And anyone that is in the restaurant business will tell you that that is nowhere near enough money to start or run a business. So I learned a lot of valuable lessons very quickly. But it took me a long time to be able to run a sustainable operation. We ran in the red every single year. And it also took me a long time to understand that the most crucial and valuable asset to your business as a small business owner is your people. And so even if at the time, 10 years ago, when I first opened, I didn't see or understand how I could get to 12 bucks an hour, 15 bucks an hour. Now I work in a tipped wage setting. I did know or learn early on that I needed to find ways to provide for my people and to make sure that we were doing something for them that you at least couldn't find and was competitive in a community like Somersworth. And I'm happy and glad that over the course of 10 years, we have gradually increased our wages to what you would describe as a living wage. And it has not been easy. And that's one of the reasons that I support legislation to raise our wage, because I think it's unfair to ask any one individual business, in particular small, independently owned Main Street business, to do this alone. Because largely in our economy, when I think about who I'm competing against, it's not whether the other bubble tea cafe across the street are going to increase their prices. It's the folks that run corporate chains that do have the means to be able to suppress prices and suppress wages, retain their employees, and I can't necessarily keep up. I don't have the collateral, I don't have the capital, and I also don't have the political will. You know, one of the things is that business owners are just very busy. They spend so much of their time working with the public, cleaning their space, running, you know, paying taxes and running payroll, that it's hard for them to have a voice politically. And oftentimes we hear that small business owners like me are the ones that stand to lose in raising the minimum wage. And what I have understood operating in a community like Somersworth is small businesses like me are the ones that stand to gain when we increase the minimum wage. And the reason for that is, it is not only that my own employees will have a disposable income or more means to pay rent and so forth, it is that my community and my customers will have the means to be able to support my business or other businesses downtown. And so that I am happy to, whether I have to adjust my prices, change my margins, change different aspects of my business model, I know that I can run a business in Somersworth because my community, the folks that live here, also have a higher standard of living. They have a higher wage. They're able to participate in their local economy. They don't need to work 2 jobs. They can come to a show at my venue. And so if I ultimately think about what I'm trying to accomplish as a small business owner, and indeed many folks that choose to run a small cafe or run a small restaurant, they do believe in building community in their main streets and downtowns. They do want to bring communities out of poverty. But I think we need small business owners at the table when we talk about this legislation so that they understand that this is not asking any one business to have to go out alone, have to figure out if they're gonna run out of money or run another quarter in the red, but that all businesses in the ecosystem are all rising the tide. And at the end of the day, the sort of last thing I'll say, when I think about the minimum wage legislation, why I think it's important for small business owners to support it and not just to live it or do it on their own as best they can. Raising the minimum wage, particularly in New Hampshire, where we are the lowest in the region, is a mandate to keep more money locally. It means that the money that goes into whether it's retail or food or healthcare will actually stay within folks that live here and will be able to be circulated in our restaurants and in our venues and in our healthcare facilities, and doesn't just go to shareholders of large corporations, often many of whom aren't part of our community. And so if we look at the long-term project of why I want to run a shop in a community that has historically struggled, I think we need to recognize that this is a moment when government works best for us by getting us all on the same page to increase that bottom and increase what our workers have, the means that they have to participate in their local economy.
Thank you, Emmett. Next, we'd like to hear from, and our last panelist is Valerie Rochon, who is the president of the Chamber Collaborative of Greater Portsmouth. Valerie, like Emmett, is also somebody who pays wages. The Chamber of Commerce exists to support, educate, advocate for, and advise our business community, but you also have employees. Can you give us your perspective on the living wage issue, both during COVID and as we try to rebuild our economy?
Thank you, Robin, and thank you for inviting me to join this group of very dedicated people who are looking to improve the lives of others in our communities. I share that with you. We all know that $7.25 is not a livable wage. We can all agree to that. We can also all agree that the minimum wage needs to be increased at the state, if not the federal level. I think we're all in agreement on that, but I have some perspectives from a lot of our business community, which ranges from small to large organizations. There's lots of benefits to increasing wages. We can attract more educated and skilled workers when a competitive wage is paid for many positions. Employees can afford a higher living standard and to live in the communities where they work, strengthening their communities, to your point, Emmett. It boosts the economy through purchases of products, goods, and services. More jobs as people stimulate the economy, demand increases, needing more jobs to keep up with the demand. Job satisfaction with higher pay, employees feel more satisfaction in their jobs. Employee loyalty, which causes less employee turnover. Motivation, people want to meet expectations and they want to keep their jobs. And performance, sufficient pay at one job might allow employees to not work 2 or 3 jobs and therefore perform better at their one job. There's also some challenges, as I think we've alluded to here. The higher cost of product. Higher operating costs often result in higher price points passed on to the consumer. A stalled job market. The increased cost of doing business may force a hiring freeze, hours cut for those already employed, or needed services to become limited. Jobs available to recently graduated college students or those on the lower end of the pay scale may have more trouble finding jobs. And as Robin alluded to, we do have 5 full-time employees, but we also have 12 part-time employees who run the Market Square information kiosk in downtown Portsmouth. Those folks are primarily retired, and for the cost of jumping, and while they do not make minimum wage at all, they don't make $15 an hour. And should it happen that it jumped from what they're making to $15 an hour immediately without a graduated wage increase, I would have to cut the hours at the kiosk or not have as many of those employees on staff. So it does have, if we're not prepared for it, if we're not working towards it, it does have potentially some negative consequences. There could be more outsourcing. Companies may gravitate towards outsourcing to keep overhead costs at a manageable amount for successful operations. It is an upward push on all wages. So those that are hovering at, say, $20 an hour, if those folks are moved up to $15 an hour, what do we have to do with those folks that are at $20 an hour? So it's an upward push all the way around. And losing the tip credit could actually cause tipped employees to lose rather than gain. So how do we raise the standard of living for all employees and employers? And I think minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, is just one of the tools in the toolbox. Policies play the largest role. And we've alluded to some of those, we've talked about some of those already. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the massive wage gap, which has grown since 1979, is because of poor public policy. Since 1979, pay and productivity have diverged, with net productivity rising close to 70%, while the hourly pay of typical workers essentially stagnated, increasing only 11.6% over 39 years, adjusted for inflation. The top 1% have earnings of that are up by 153.6%. The income, wages, and wealth generated over the last 4 decades have failed to trickle down to the vast majority because policy choices made on behalf of those with the most income, wealth, and power have exacerbated inequality. Other policies that need to be considered, we've talked about some of them: childcare and aftercare subsidies. Full-time kindergarten allows our employees to keep their jobs. Sustainable paid family leave, not as a tax to employers, allows workers to care for their family obligations and then go back to their jobs, not lose them. Increased public transportation, we talked about your bus, your person riding the bus, Deb. Increased public transportation allows employees cost-effective transport to and from work. Affordable housing policies that allow employees to live where they work, contributing to their communities by incentivizing those who develop that housing, and supporting higher education to secure higher paying jobs. New Hampshire ranks in the top 5 states for K through 12 education, but it ranks at the bottom for investment in support of public higher education. And we need to improve broadband so more employees can work remotely and be home with their families. How do we fix this? We need to work together to change policies that negatively impact the working family. A number of you have already said, contact your US delegation, raise the wage. We need to, but there's so many other policies that we need to be working on. It's not just raising the minimum wage. Maintain the credit for tipped employees. It's possible that eliminating the tip credit would reduce take-home pay for many tipped employees, which is why the District of Columbia City Council recently invalidated a proposal to eliminate its tip credit. Considered staggered entry-level or training wages, that is, for example, for high schoolers or retired workers who are working as our folks who, they're the A team, they absolutely love what they do, but making the $15 an hour is not necessary or something that they're looking towards. So we all have the same goal. We want to raise the living standard for all of our families. We do that through economic vitality and vibrancy. We need steady growth for businesses that drive the economy. And it is going to take this village and more of us to make it happen. So thank you very much for including me tonight.
Thank you, Valerie. You gave us lots of ideas, wonderful ideas on the wide array of things that we need to do to tackle this problem. My panelists have an agenda of how we're going to run this night, but I'm going to change this a little bit to open it up until about 8:20 for each of my panelists to raise your hand if you have any comments or questions of any other panelist now. So I'm watching for hands to be raised to ask questions or make any other comments about ideas on how to change the living situation for the low income members. Valerie.
So, thank you, Robin. Although when we were sort of rehearsing this, I said I wouldn't have any questions, but that flew out the window. So, Christina, I think having 2 grandsons in daycare, I see the struggle. And my question for you is, in the perfect world, how would you see childcare facilities being funded so that we can get our employees to work, keep them at work when they're feeling confident that their children are being cared for, and pay the child care workers who are critical to the development of our children what they're really worth, which none of us honestly can afford. So can you help me with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really goes down to, I think building on some of what Emmett said about really perceiving some of the things that we're talking about as simply a public good. things that make sense for all of us. And I would put childcare in that space. Because when you have high quality childcare, the workers can go to work feeling good about the work that they're doing. You have a workforce that's well compensated and valued for what they provide. And the employers get a worker who shows up focused on the job at hand. So for me, and then we get a workforce that's coming up out of a high quality childcare system that we're going to rely upon for the future. But I think we have to look at the roles of all of those individuals. Because certainly parents recognize that there's going to be a contribution they have to make to this. They're going to want to say, they're going to want to be able to choose the childcare that works for them and that's what they want. And that can be a wide variety of different types of care. The employer gets a huge benefit around high quality childcare. I think a lot of employers are looking for ways to support childcare. I think, and within that, there's a role for the state and the federal government. We currently have a childcare subsidy program that allows you to get up to about 250% of poverty, federal poverty level, that allows you to get some childcare assistance. One of the problems is that program pays the provider far less than what it costs to provide the care. So the parents are able to get the benefit. The parents are often asked to top that up. So then we're still in a situation where estimates say childcare should be about 7% of your wages. It often is far more than that. You're talking about 20, 25%. Add to that, we've heard housing can often be 50% of your take-home wages. The whole thing just starts to tip. And then we end up in a situation where my child is sick, I can't take time off, maybe I need to take care of myself. None of that can happen. So there are currently some legislation being proposed. And I think there was nothing like the COVID crisis to put childcare front and center in the thinking. Because when schools closed, and schools are a huge aspect of childcare that we don't often think of. We think of under fives. But when suddenly that entire school age population was home, we had huge numbers of people who could not go to work. We had entire industries that were paralyzed as a result. So I think we've had a change in thinking. I think we had been building our evidence to say, let me show you how important this is. Now we have the response of the crisis that says, without childcare, we can't make this work. And we've got some insights into the fact that childcare as a business model was really teetering. And I have a lot of respect for Emmett, who really worked out what are those margins, how can we make this work? And I'd say a lot of the childcare providers I work with, they are the most thrifty, they are amazing managers of money, and they still simply can't do it. And they're an aging workforce, and it's getting harder. And we're learning more about if you keep a lower ratio, the quality of care might be higher. But the only way a business model works is by having more children. So I guess the long and short of the answer, Valerie, is we have to see this for the communal good that it provides. And we have to look at all the different streams. There's currently funding in the Biden relief, the administration's proposed relief package that will put some more money into the system and allow for some real innovation. We're talking to the Department of Employment Security at looking at ways to get that workforce, because Kathy mentioned, we're not just going to put anyone in a classroom. How do we get the skills developed and get the credentialing people need without burdensome debt for the people that want to be providing this work? And then let's support the system over the long term. And there's some legislation, the Child Care for Working Families Act, that would look at longer term stabilization of the sector. But the long and short of it is nobody can do it alone. If we're really going to make this the investment that we need, that we all benefit from, it needs to come. We need to see this as a collective responsibility, and we all need to show up to the table.
Thank you. Pati, you have your hand up.
You did have my hand up. Thank you. Do you know, as I've listened to everybody here, and it really all comes down to money, doesn't it? It's where do you find the money to do what you need to do? And how does that get allocated? And how do we make that work? But I think that we need to go back to some of that old discussion that used to happen that I don't hear as much anymore, maybe because I'm old. But, you know, when you have people who are working, who can have some sort of health insurance, hospitals save millions of dollars. When you have a system where people are not dependent upon food stamps, we save money. When TANF, and some of you might remember it as welfare payments, are not as required, we save money. And it seems to me that oftentimes we dig ourselves into a hole and we're afraid to come out because we're afraid to make that change. But I would suggest that when you take a look at raising the wage, making sure that the children have what they need, making sure that seniors have what they need. And we see now more seniors as parents because the world has changed. I think this is why I said if we could get together, if we could take some action, if we could continue these conversations, and there is a solution, but for some reason, we don't want to see it, I think, sometimes. And we get a little, you know, we get the blinders on, but it's like this. And if we could just change that balance, and if we could save money in places that could get filtered back into our state, we would be in a lot better shape. Thank you.
Emmett, I see your hand.
Yeah, this is sort of a response, but also it might be a question back to Pati and others. We've talked a lot about how many policies that we need to pass that are structurally related to each other, particularly in New Hampshire. And we have also talked about how important the lived experience of someone that is dealing with poverty or housing instability or lack of childcare is crucial to being able to put a spotlight on what those policies are that need to change. There is a reality in the state of New Hampshire that we have a legislature that is also one based on and is inaccessible to poverty. We do not pay our state legislators. We don't pay our state senators. We barely pay our executive counselors. And so what I am sort of wondering, other than encouraging everyone on here to both run for office and to ask all of their constituents to run for office, is how do we crack the nut where so many of the folks, if we look at our actual state house, it is older, male, white, cisgender, heterosexual, of means, that it isn't representative of so many of the experiences many of your beneficiaries and constituents that you engage with on a regular basis. And again, short of all of you signing up today to run for office to speak to these issues, how do we, if we can all see that those policies and we can agree, and we have business representatives here tonight in the Chamber of Commerce, and we have folks that are representing folks that have had the bottom fall out for them. And if we are all in agreement that we need to raise the wage or provide childcare as a public good, or work towards affordable housing, how do we politically solve that given the actual reality of New Hampshire's structure of government?
Wow. Okay. Valerie. First, wait a minute. We haven't heard from Deb, so I'll hear from Deb, then we'll come back to you, Valerie.
I'm happy to concede, but I think that one of the things that strikes me is there's so much existing infrastructure that doesn't work. And, in so many levels, so many levels. And so when people hear the word universal childcare, they have a near heart attack. And many years ago, I was an intern at UVM, and I worked in Burlington, Vermont with Bernie Sanders and the city of Burlington created for the city and its, outskirts, childcare for everybody, so that the banks could afford to hire tellers at whatever the wage was then, probably $6 an hour, that there were a couple of big companies, manufacturing companies, could take advantage of it. The bigger companies paid in, and And because they were having an aging population crisis, they also needed to have some type of, they wanted young people coming back to Burlington. And Burlington is now a really kind of thriving city. I mean, it was then, I thought it was cool then, and but it still is. And I think one of the things was really getting together, even if smaller communities can do a microcosm of what can it be like if we take Portsmouth and the surrounding communities, a community of wealth, no doubt. Or what if we take Concord and the surrounding communities and we say, we're going to demonstrate, get rid of all this other stuff. It's not working. It is just, if you have to stand in line to get food stamps, to get welfare, if any of you have ever done it, I did it once in my life way back when I was a single mom. And I remember sitting in the office in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and this woman telling me that I made too much money because I was a bank teller. And let me tell you, I wasn't making anything. And I was mortified that the only way I was going to be able to get healthcare for my daughter was to go on welfare, which was to make less money. And then I think the other thing we have to really think about is I'm hearing these childcare conversation. We hear it all the time right now, the disparity of education. You know, if you live in this area of a city, did some time in LA, you did not want to live in South LA because the education was not good for your kids. If you really want to face that, then we have to start talking about universal kind of childcare issues and how do we make that happen. But if we can't get it on a big state level, then some communities need to step up and say, let's try, let's see what happens. Because, you know, Portsmouth wants to be this and is this wonderful community and restaurants. And we've seen how amazing it is and how sad it is to see some of that wonderful stuff go away during COVID. And so why couldn't we? We're a community of great wealth. Why couldn't we demonstrate that we value our waitresses and our bartenders who are all now, you know, really struggling and trying to figure out how to live off of welfare checks and no childcare and all of that. So I just think sometimes if you can't get it on a state level, which sometimes I wonder if it's possible in New Hampshire, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think if you can't, then there's always opportunities for communities to say, let's think outside the box. Let's demonstrate it can happen. That's what innovation is. So maybe that's what we need to think about. That's it.
Okay, back to you, Valerie.
Thank you. Well, I would vote for you, Deb. If you're going to run, I'm voting for you. But I guess I wanted to respond to what Emmett was asking about, you know, what do you do when you have, in effect, retired people in the State House who don't get paid for this, and it's you know, as you said, a certain demographic, and I think it requires people like all of this group here, because first of all, you have to vote for these people, you have to vote them in, but secondly, once they're in there, they have to listen to groups of unified people. So I look at the NHLRA, the New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association, and that is an association of people who are around the state, who are lodges and restaurants, who have certain common interests. And I will tell you that the NHLRA is a very powerful organization in the State House. Well, there's a lot of powerful women and men here right now who could band together and become just as powerful as that if you chose to work together to do that. And because I think we're all on the same page on very many levels. And so I don't know, particularly after COVID, Emmett, I don't know where you get the money to pay for, like, I don't even know the 700 representatives that we have in New Hampshire. I don't know where you get the money to pay for that. We're now, you know, the budgets are already being cut by 20% across the board in the state right now. So I don't know where you get the money for that. And I think there's something to be said for a non-paid and community level legislature, as opposed to career politicians who get paid to do that. So I think there's something to be said for that. But there is nothing that beats the power of a group of determined people. And I see a bunch of determined people here. And I'm not sure under which umbrella that could happen, or if there isn't already some sort of an organization or a framework with which we could all get involved. Emmett, hopefully you're going to respond to that and tell me what that is. don't mean to throw you under the bus there, but you were smiling. So that gave me an indication you have an idea. And I'm going to vote for you anyhow, Emmett. So I just think that there's power in the people.
Thank you. Christina.
I think you're right, Valerie, and I think it is about trying to figure out what we can do, because I think often it can seem very insurmountable. And I think there's 2 points I wanted to make to that is I spent a lot of time with our electeds, and a lot of them are really good, decent people. And you go up there and do it for $100, it's tough. The problem is, I think our collective understanding of each other is so disparate. So when I go and talk about affordable childcare, I have some of them, they're like, yeah, I support affordable childcare. And then I explain, like, what do you know what I mean by that? Let me explain to you what those costs are. And they're shocked. And I think we talk paid leave, another great issue, which I fully agree with Valerie. I think coming up with a paid leave program that allows people to take care of themselves and their loved ones and be able to go back to work and have some support that can be paid for out of a fund. We need to do something, because we cannot rely upon some of those policy. We can't push some of those policy responses onto the backs of small business owners like Emmett. But at first, I think we have to come up with a framework of collective understanding. And the last thing I'm going to say is a little bit of what Portsmouth has done is we had an issue where 20% of our kids were not getting a preschool experience. And the school district, this is pre-COVID, they took this up and they said, we want to figure out how to do this. And we had a lot of discussions. I was involved with some members of the board, our superintendent, Steve Zadrovich, and we sat around and we said, one of the problems with being poor is we take you in and we tell you what we're going to give you, what you're entitled to. And we take away any power or any control of decision making. So when we thought about this, we said, we think everybody wants to do the right thing for their kids. What if we went and said, what do you want? Because as a person who had privilege, I could decide what I wanted for my child. I could then seek it out and think of what do I thought was quality. And so we have things like child scholarship. We had Head Start in our community. But when we went to these families and said, what do you want? They were shocked. No one was asking them what they want for their kids. And then we said, what are the barriers for you to get there? And sometimes it's transportation. I can't get to community campus on the bus with my 2 other kids for 2 hours each way. Other times, it might have been, I can't really get the paperwork to go with, or one challenge, or we're both on disability, we don't qualify. And we have someone in place with the Portsmouth School Department who is helping families get what they want. She's helping to support their decision. And the benefit is when those families go into our kindergartens, their children are better prepared, they have a connection with the community, and we've been able to get them on a level playing field with the 80% of their classmates who had access to a childcare system. And what they did with that family, helping them with access, is the school district said, we're already providing transportation for a student. This is a creative way that we can make something happen. We can make something work. So I think sometimes is it going to take money? Absolutely. But some of it we can do by thinking creatively about the money that we do have in the system.
Okay, Pati.
As we bring up the New Hampshire legislature, and I was in the legislature in the early 70s and know the value of having a plate so you could drive to the toll booth and save 25 cents. I think that New Hampshire is in a unique position because of its history. And I like very much that we are a volunteer, technically, political representatives. And yes, it is predominantly white men and people of means and all of that. And I think that there has to be a way, and I love Deb Deb's suggestion of doing something on a pilot. Oftentimes it's what you show people more than what you tell people. So I think when you're looking at people who are older, who don't understand everything about daycare and the cost of daycare and the value of daycare, because they're older, many of them, their wives stayed home and raised their children. It wasn't that big an issue. It is now in this day and age. So perhaps to do something where we can have a pilot program and actually do statistics, see what happens, and bring that before a committee and our local legislators and senators and representatives and you name it, they should come. And that would be bankers and hospital officials and everybody. Maybe the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, that it might not be that we have to get rid of our legislature, but rather enjoy what they bring to us through their history but show them that the world has changed a little bit and look what we did and look how it's changed. So I think that's a balance too. And Valerie talked a lot about how things need to be a balance. It just can't be one way or another. But certainly, I mean, and I'm a real proponent, who works with children all the time, and 70% of the children that we see in shelter are under the age of 5 years old. We have babies constantly. We have moms having babies while they're living in shelter. We worry all the time about what will happen to those children and will they have a chance and will they have a dream for a better life? Maybe it will be easier if we could show that dream a little bit more, and that may be very helpful. Thanks. I liked your idea, Deb.
Okay, we have a little lull here, and we have a question or a comment from our audience. I don't have a name here, but it says, I'm wondering about access to healthcare and especially access to reliable birth control for low-wage earners. Family planning can be critical for family budgets. What are panelists' thoughts about how to advocate for the many policy changes this is the second question. What are panelists' thoughts about how to advocate for the many policy changes that Valerie outlined? And to what extent do panelists see solutions as state versus federal? Those are three different questions. Let's start with one. Let's start with the first one about access to reliable family planning for low-wage earners.
I can speak to that. I mean, I think it was about healthcare as well, right? One of the problems now is with our healthcare being either tied to our jobs, or access through like expanded Medicaid, which is based on our income, we have a problem. And I mean, personally, and I think Kathy will share this with me, healthcare should be a human right. I mean, we should have healthcare available and accessible to everyone. I've lived in countries where that was the case. And I think if we could take healthcare out of the concern for businesses in terms of the major expense that it incurs, and I know we get healthcare through my husband's job and it's more and more expensive all the time. And I think healthcare is a prohibitive to most individuals to purchase by themselves on the fair market. So your option is you either stay attached to a job where you're able to get access to that care, or you end up in a position where because of your income, you might qualify for expanded Medicaid. But we see access to healthcare saves us money in the long term. So I think that question is family planning is important, but we really should see that just as a part of a comprehensive healthcare system.
Okay, what are your thoughts about how to advocate for the many policy changes that Valerie advocated for, that Chris just advocated for? Let's see, what did we hear about transportation? We need better transportation, obviously. So how should we advocate for that? What's the best route to go? State, federal, both? Any thoughts?
I'll give that a little a shot there, Robin. I think there are so many ways for you to advocate, and I think it should be D, all of the above, in all of those areas. So you need to advocate locally. You need to be plugged into your city. Does your city have transportation? Where does Coast run? Does Coast run in a place that it needs to run? And that's another organization that struggles. They're struggling. They are losing, is it this year, $2 million of their funding that was provided by the state as they were building the Dover, the bridge, and doing all of those upgrades. So Coast is hurting, but they want to do everything they possibly can to get people where they need to go at a price that they can afford. The question is, how do you pay your bus drivers, and how do you put gas in these vehicles, and how do you maintain them? So, as somebody, as I think multiple of us have said, it comes down to money. We need money. And if we don't have money, we need to get creative. But I think the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the grease. And so depending on what you're advocating about, you need to reach out to the right people, first in your community, and then in your region, and then state, and then certainly federal. And we all know that Senator Shaheen's office, Senator Hassan's office, Chris Pappas's office, and Annie Custer's office are absolutely approachable and accessible. And you should reach out to them and tell them what it is that you're thinking about. It's one thing, there's some of us that are here. I mean, we're talking to these people all the time. They hear from us all the time. They don't want to hear from us. They want to hear from everybody else. So, there's 20 something people on this call. Do you call Senator Shaheen's office? Do you call Chris Pappas's office? Because that's who they want to hear from. They want to hear from the people who aren't us, who aren't talking, we're always, right, Christina, we're always, yapping at them and telling them, we're advocating all the time. And okay, that needs to happen, but it really needs to happen from a lot of other people as well. And again, if there's a way to pull this group together, there's 20 people on this call who might be interested in getting involved. Is there a way to pull this group together to become unified in some of these discussions? Because that helps as well. United we stand.
Okay, let's see. We have in our chat, there is a note about a rights and democracy Zoom on how to talk to business owners about fair wages. And I think there might be a takeaway in there. I'm not positive, but there might be a takeaway on how to talk to your legislators about fair wages as well. And that is coming this Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m. So if you can copy the link there, you can highlight it on your computer, copy and paste, or go to Rights and Democracy online, and I'm sure you can find a link to that event. It's only an hour long, 6 to 7 p.m. That's one thing you can do. Emmett, do you have some thoughts? Oh, politician of ours.
Well, I actually wanted to ask Kathy a question. Valerie was mentioning what's the organization, and I certainly imagine Raise Up is one of the leaders. And Kathy, you were talking earlier about, what does some of the opposition say? And I'm wondering if you can speak to when the opposition is maybe just putting up a front, and there are a hidden agenda to those that benefit from a low minimum wage, separated from those that actually just haven't heard the arguments as to whether we're the only state in New England, and how much of that opposition from your vantage point is winnable, could be allied if they heard from a different perspective or lived experience of what ultimately raising the wage would do.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head before when you were talking about small businesses, because the large corporations like the dollar stores or whatever are notorious for paying their employees a very low wage, and they get away with it because they have money on a national level to support things like ALEC and all of these right-wing political organizations that have resources to you know, to put to bear on the, these are professionals, and they are going in and talking to legislators. They wine and dine them, and they tell them, no, you can't raise the minimum wage. And a big part of their argument is that, well, you should let the free market dictate how much people get paid. In fact, when Governor Sununu signed one of the vetoes, his statement was that people should expect to be paid based on how much money they're making for their employers. So if you're not making a lot of money for your employer, then you shouldn't be making a living wage. The profit is the most important aspect of the business. And for small businesses like yours, you tend to work elbow to elbow with the people that you're employing. They're essential to your business. And one of the people that spoke about this was a woman who and her husband own a couple of restaurants, and they say that most small business people get into it because they want to do what they love. And again, like the healthcare thing, if you can't leave the corporate job to go be a florist or do whatever it is that you really would love to do, those people that are able to make that leap because they have a spouse that provides health insurance, or maybe they're retired, or they're independently wealthy or something, they're the ones that, get to start these small businesses. And again, it's about competition. I mean, Walmart can buy a bazillion widgets at a discount, whereas, the small hardware store, they need to pay a higher price, and then they want the person that works side by side with them. They don't think of their employees as being disposable. So, and in terms of changing the narrative about this, we did this starting in the 1930s. There's a statue of Wynant up by the State House, and he was a huge proponent of living wages for people. He was a Republican. He was the first director of the Social Security Administration. And it was Stiles Bridges who actually started with a minimum wage in the state of New Hampshire. And then, it became all about ideology, not about the quality of life for the people who live in this state, but about how much money you can make off the people who live in this state. So, I think it's broken. It's broken. And I think we need to recognize that, this Fight for 15 thing, a couple of years ago, people thought, you are crazy to be saying that. But by speaking proudly, having your facts right in front of you, and being able to speak definitively about what the advantages are to paying people a living wage, that's how you can succeed. I hope I answered your question.
That was amazing. I have a question here about medical insurance and sick time. Actually, I wish I could end with yours, but I want to get every minute out of this. Kathy, that was a fantastic wrap up there. But if anyone has just a minute to talk about medical insurance and sick time, there was a little bit of a mention about that. No?
I'll just say, when you go into a restaurant, do you want the person handling your food to be there, even though they're sick, because they can't afford to stay home? That's all I have to say about it.
There's a bill currently, there's a bill that's going to be going through New Hampshire State House, which would, and I'm not sure the specifics of it, but it would require that you accrue earned sick time based on the hours that you work. And I think this has become, I think Kathy's raising a really great point. This has become particularly more of a focus has gone on to this as we look at both times where we've seen disease spread from people who are unable to take time off, but also in the time of COVID, where now we're putting these mandatory quarantines on folks. But if they don't have the ability to earn wages in that time, it's a problem. So currently with some of the COVID money, you were able to access time, you were able to access a portion of your wages through unemployment, but there's certainly a desire for there to be an embedded sick policy. So that bill has not been scheduled yet, but that's currently to be heard. And there's another bill that would extend some of the COVID restrictions. And I know there's also a discussion of longer term paid family and medical leave, which, I think it fits in this discussion really well, because I think it's a policy that really levels the playing field for all workers. But much like when Kathy said, we were saying the fight for 15, are you crazy? We used to say, for those folks like me who argue for paid family and medical leave, it's never going to happen. And now the question around wages is, how are we going to do this in a way that everyone can get on board with? And for paid family and medical leave, there's now wide agreement that this policy implementation needs to happen. And the question is, how do we do it? How do we fund it? The mechanics of it. So I think as much as we have a lot of work to do, we have to look at how much traction we've gained.
Okay, wow. I'll just add one of my own experiences when we lived in West Virginia and I was a working mom with 2 small children. The local hospital ran a daycare for sick children that was not terribly expensive. And you just had to sign up beforehand. And that was such a godsend to me to have that when you've got a kid with a cold and you can't leave them home and you can't not go to work. That it's another part of that infrastructure that you really need that can go along with paid family sick leave, is something like that. I'm going to end with a comment from Joe Foster. She says, I agree with Valerie that this is going to take a multi-pronged approach to raise up working families and individuals. But how can we sustain this without a living wage? Isn't the idea that people should be able to earn a wage that affords them the opportunity to pay for basic needs? Why are some jobs valued more than others? If a business can't afford to pay a living wage to its employees, what is their value to the community? And I'll end this by thanking all of you. You really gave people an important piece of what it's like to be a low-income worker in this country, in this state, in your towns. Thank you so much tonight.